Kikank. Man, I was so all right. Hold on a second. We're so good. We're doing so well. Whoa.
Now we're scaring the people.
Wow.
What happened? Now Lon's here.
Ricky, wow. Guys, welcome back. You know what that is? You're soaking in it. Welcome back to Pencil to Pencil. Pencil to Pencil Live. That's right. We gotta prep for surgery.
I feel mushy.
Your expert surgeons on call checking in tonight. It must be Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST if you see the Pencileros on your screen. Welcome back to Pencil to Pencil. I'm your first host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. I am a cartoonist in good standing and also the author illustrator of the series Leon the Extraordinary at Scholastic underneath the graphics imprint. You may be familiar with Dog Man. You may be familiar with Bone. You may be familiar with Raina Tegelmeyer's work. Well, Leon's right on that list. It's like the Def Jam of cartoon publishers. Leon is on stores right now, but in short weeks, you guys, Leon Worst Friends Forever will be in stores. Still have time to pre-order it. Why don't you do that right now?
It's on a truck somewhere heading.
That's right. We're running choruses through Texarkana. The Smokies are on our tail. So I can't do 10-4 Good Buddy this year. It's 10-1 Good Buddy. But I would be remiss if I did not introduce our co-host. He is one of the Davy Crockett's of webcomics. He is a Johnny Appleseed of webcomics. He is known in the internet ring as Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello, guys. It's so good to see you.
Well, hello.
I'm excited for the next Leon book. That's gonna make October. I'm very excited for that. My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's over on the Webtoons, the Tapest, the Go Comics. Episode 314 is on the drawing board right now.
314. Wow.
I make some TTRPG stuff. I just got back from the Daytona Beach Comic-Con, so nice to meet folks there. In a couple of weeks, I'm heading off to Baltimore, and then after that, Gamehole Con. If you are a Dungeons and Dragons person anywhere near Madison, Wisconsin, I hope to see you there.
Wait, Gamehole again? I feel like you were just there.
October to October. I was just there. Yeah, it goes by super quick.
That's crazy.
But I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the physician scientist searching for a way to tap into the hidden strength that all humans have.
That's the abacus.
The magnificent Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello, everybody.
Well, hello.
My name is Mike Manley. I draw The Phantom and Judge Parker currently, but I've probably drawn your childhood. It's funny. I've been digging out some old activity books. Covers and things that I did in the 80s for Western Public. I put up one day laser tag, and
wow.
It was.
Explain to the young people what lasers are, Mike.
Lasers are something that goes pew pew. And TV, they go pew pew, and they only come out like a little bolt. When in reality, a laser is like a continuous beam, like a Star Trek is a much better a phaser is a much better representation of what a laser would do.
So it's like a stream, like
yeah, you turn it on and the beam comes out until you turn the beam off. But usually in science fiction, you have the beam and then like it goes, and then you see it end. When in reality, it's moving at the speed of light, so it would just be off. You wouldn't see it going into
your blaster or your Battlestar Galactica laser bullets.
Yeah.
Laser bullet. Is that what they call them? Laser bullet?
I don't know what they call it, but that's what it feels like. You can see them travel and all that.
Yeah, I guess. And then one of our former guests, I think, worked on the show. And he was saying that they had a problem with it If you notice when you guys watch G.I. Joe, everybody had a laser. Nobody actually had a gun.
Right.
Because you couldn't shoot anybody with a gun, but you could shoot people with a laser. So that's sort of how they got around the thing. And I think Tim said the way they got around the shooting was he didn't have a holster. The character didn't have a holster. So it wasn't like, pew!
Right. So the holster meant what? Like it wasn't a gun? If he didn't like unsheath it, was that kind of
Yeah. You know, there was all this stuff about everybody has a laser gun. Now, I would assume if you shot somebody in the head with a laser gun, it would just kill them just like a regular gun. But
right.
You know, no, I don't think there's any body count ever on any of those.
No.
What did they do? What do you do with a Phantom? How do you handle viscera when you're drawing the Phantom? Like, what is a
nice?
There has never been an issue on the Phantom because he's had the gun since the beginning, right? The twin was it Desert Eagle 45s, and we show him shooting, but you know you would never show him shooting a person point blank. So
no double taps, nothing like that.
Yeah, you wouldn't see him like pull a headshot, you know.
Viscera and organs and lunch meats. Yeah,
because the comic strips are probably the most conservative form of comics, right? Because they always say children are reading them, although I don't think that children are really reading strips, but they always assume that children are reading strips. Now, like in the old days, Dick Tracy used to cat people. You know, people got shot. You would see people get shot, but in that era, you know, he had cowboys shooting people.
It was more like, oh, you got me.
Yeah, in the war, yeah.
Oh,
right. Oh, you killed. Like you would play as a kid, like, you know, no, you missed. No, I didn't.
No, yeah. Every school street fight that started with that. I shot you. You missed. No, you didn't.
But I did have a few times on Judge Parker where one of the newspapers objected to there being guns, which I found very odd because there had always been guns in Judge Parker, not like all the time, but one story, the editor of one particular newspaper objected to the guns, but I had previously drawn guns in the strip, so it was a very odd thing. And then usually the editor would go like, do you mind doing a paste over like for this one, so you just like take the gun out or something? Yeah,
I heard that in the gaming industry, people complain about games. They come in and they just complain, and they're not, and calling them tourists, that they're not actual gamers. They're just coming in to complain. And I say, like, if you've done something in the comic strip for ages, and then suddenly it's an issue with an, you know, you're right. It can't be an existing audience member. It has to be somebody new, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the odd things about doing newspaper strips, as long as I have now, is you realize that newspaper strips are the one thing that the editor, the features editors, the people that, you know, do, you know, run Irma Bombeck or whatever, the crossword puzzles or whatever, they can say, and they're always running polls like, which strips should we get rid of? Should we get rid of Ham Fisher and Peanuts? Or, you know, they're always trying to play around with that, and then have people write in and go, well, you know, not enough people voted for Henry, you know, but like every strip.
This is my Henry.
Yeah. every strip is somebody's favorite strip. So yeah, it's a very odd. It's not like comic books, right? where usually if your sales fall too low, they just cancel the whole book. You have strips that have been running literally for decades that probably don't have a very high circulation, but just enough to keep it going. Because that generation of people that read the strips are very vocal, and they will write in to, you know, the Tribune and go, "Hey, where's Barney Google? You know, where's Linus and Lucy?"
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I find, especially right now, how interesting it is that there are new strips being launched. You know, that's why I was like running all over my social medias, like celebrating Tahit Bondia for comic strip of the year for Crabgrass, where, you know, his deal's still pretty fresh. And, you know, and also we have like George Gant, D. Parson just got Rosebud syndicated.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm glad to see that engine still getting coal put into it. But, you know, what Mike says is correct. There's always, you know, almost maybe to make room for these new things, something else has to go. Maybe in Crabgrass's case, it was a little different after Scott Adams kind of, you know, melted his whole career a couple of like last year. So, but it's just, you know, it's just a very interesting thing. And I guess that would bring us to the beginning of our topic tonight, you guys. So, as you all can tell, we do not have a guest tonight. And I think some of you guys have gotten spoiled. You're like, yo, wait, you guys have guests all the time. No, don't forget that we're expert cartoonists, and we can talk amongst ourselves. It is just as entertaining. Even though we had a really fantastic conversation with Robert Alvarez last week. It was really great to see so many people checking in for that. And then Steve Purcell the week before. Come on, man, it's crazy. But, you know, when we're in between kind of like a cool down period for you gamers out there. Hey, D, see, I just gave D a shout out in a second ago. Shout out to Rosebud. What up, D? We'll have to talk to you soon. That when we get a chance to sniff the coffee beans, reset our sniffers, as it were, I think it will be a really great topic to talk about this time of year. It's the fall, you guys, and when the seasons change, sometimes a young artist's fancy turns to what happens next in their career, right? You know, we think about school, education, going back to school. Maybe you're in school, and I brought this up with the fellas. I think a lot of our audience are pros, enthusiasts, hobbyists, maybe semi-pros, and also maybe people who have children who are of the age that they're probably going to school, you know, in higher education. That's how old we are.
There's a lot of people on my Facebook in the last couple of weeks where their kid was going off to college. A whole bunch of people who are just at that right age now where their kid is graduating high school and going off to college.
Yeah. You know, my Facebook feed the last couple of weeks were full of my buddies being the dad, moving their kids into the dorms, and I just like, oh my god, I'm so old. And if it's not that, they're planning weddings. That's our age group now. So I think that even impacts a little bit of what we talk about here on the live stream, because you know, as we've talked in the past, and one of my favorite issues of Draw Magazine was Mike's cover with the what was it like the Skeletor's castle of art school.
Right. Yeah. You know, are you going to go up the path of success or get chewed out and spit out into the river of bad drawing? Yeah.
Right. And you know, and I think if you go through our archives, we've talked ad nauseum about art school and kind of even the modern state of art school. And there's been a lot of things happening politically in arts with art schools and universities and all that kind of stuff. So kind of like, what does that mean? Maybe not necessarily for the clientele that watch Pencil to Pencil, but maybe your younglings who are just like, you know what, with your kid's alpaca haircut, you know what, I'm really into my art right now. And you're like, shit, maybe I need to talk to JN Conley 316 and Mike Manley. I need that good advice. What's the right move at this point in our society to kind of navigate my kid through college? Maybe I'm trying to figure out how to start a studio. You know, a lot of our guests who, like even Robert Alvarez, who's kind of at the twilight of his animation career, he said even on the show that he's retired. How interesting is that to even think about retiring?
Right.
You know what I mean? So like
to be able to retire.
Yeah. So like even think about all of those steps that we didn't talk about, and even I'm getting to it, you guys. And even when Steve Purcell was on, the chat was like, yo, what about he worked on Brave and Pixar? We didn't even talk about that because you wind up doing so much stuff through your career. Like some of those little milestones to the fans are just things like, oh yeah, I remember that gig. They didn't pay me on time. You know what I mean? So like to get from that end point from the beginning point, there's a lot of steps you have to take. And I'm thinking that that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Like what is in the modern tool belt of practicing cartoonist, maybe some tips on what a younger cartoonist needs to look out for on this new road. And Steve, am I doing this correctly? Am I just running my mouth here?
Oh, I'm loving all of this. I was thinking about I think coming at it from the perspective of, well, I mean, the stuff that the careers that you, Mike, D have are, I don't know, almost incredibly aspirational. It's like if someone came to you and say, I want to be a YA graphic novelist, or I want to do a syndicated comic strip, you'd be like, okay, it's okay. Yeah, it's like, it is sort of like, I see people at the Paneras doing scratchers to do their lottery. There's an improbability to success in that, regardless of skill, talent, elbow grease,
grit.
Yeah. So there, if you were gonna, and often we come back to, if you're gonna start today, what would you do? And we go back to web comics and stuff like that. But there is the educational component of the fact that the backgrounds that you guys have gave you, or the backgrounds you created for yourselves gave you foundational skills that let you survive long enough to get where you are, which is so impressive. And I feel like that might be, I know Mike often comes back to character, comes back to personality of a person when he would teach. I'm not sure if that's a major equation in all this before we even get to picking up a pencil.
Well, you know what, I want to maybe touch on a little bit of this kind of touch point that so many of our guests, because we're talking about the guests a lot, and there's always this crucial moment in almost everybody's story where they kind of jumped out off the cliff and just did something wild that a lot of people go, what? Like I recall very vividly Reggie Byers talking about going through the trash at Comico as a kid, looking to figure out how they make comics. Or even Purcell just talked about that. Or Alvarez. I think Mike is frozen. I thought he was just. Oh, okay. You were so still. I thought you froze.
Yes, Jamar, please continue.
I was getting close. I was looking for blinking.
You just need to open your arms like a toll booth once in a while, just so I can tell. So even Alvarez talking about just going, these moments where you have to go, this is really what I want to do, and I'm going to find any way possible to figure it out, to do it. I don't think, maybe that era of getting into the business is gone, Like I don't really think there's besides like data piracy, you're going to like find files of things to kind of help you get ahead. It doesn't work that way.
Dumpster diving behind Hanna-Barbera. No.
Yeah, that's not going to work now. But to what you were saying, Steve, and to what Mike talks about a lot with personality and character is that, and it sounds really glib to just say, oh, you really have to want it. But I think that's paramount.
Yeah.
Like you have to be so stubborn that you'll never take no for an answer, and you're just going to keep figuring out how to knock this windmill down. And that's always a constant in every one of these people we've talked to over the 100 or so episodes of interviews we've done. I don't know. I don't think you can teach that because almost all of us have taught at some point, and you could teach the greatest curriculum in the world to kids who don't want it. Right. They got to school, they got to your classroom, somehow they got in that seat, but they're looking out the window because they'd rather be doing something else. And you can't make them want that.
And the fact is that art school is too easy to go to. That's a big issue, I think, because it has the worst outcome of like all the. It's essentially being a trade school. They don't like to call it a trade, but I think it's too easy to get into. So you have a lot of people that go in and they're sort of hopeful, but as we were talking about before we started the podcast, I think the hardest thing on your journey when you start is having people that have the information to help you make sort of critical choices in the beginning, right? So most people's parents don't know artists. They don't know what you need to know in order to, draw Batman or to work for Disney or Pixar or work in games. How many people's parents know what you need to do that, right? They don't. They want to support their kid. And they, every parent's worried that their kids, has chosen the right profession and will be successful and happy. And, most art schools, I mean, there's a handful of art schools that are very hard to get in. And that's good because the people that get in stand a higher chance of being successful than a school that has no portfolio requirement. So there are like several places in the beginning of your first, say, 5 to 10 years, I think, that are very critical.
10 years?
Very critical, right? Because you go through college, it's 4 years and it spits you out. And if you're fortunate, after college, you find some place to land and you start working. That's when your career starts. And often when you really start learning, because you're actually on the job, you're really learning. And it counts. What you do counts in a way that it doesn't count when you're in college, right? Because it's school. And so if you mess up, it's okay because you're in school. You can mess up. If you're great, that's okay because you're in school. So, but I think, like I was saying before we went live, the advice I would have given somebody 20 years ago or 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, it's always changing. Now because of AI, a person who's in their 30s or 40s as a cartoonist or as an artist working in commercial art has to be aware of how that technology is changing everything. And if you're working in Hollywood, if you're all attached to any of these big companies, that's changing everything, right? The union is going to try to get minimums and all kinds of stuff for the animation union so that you get a minimum staffing and, the AI can't do everything. There's like all that on top of you improving your skill or having to learn a new thing, because most people in animation are journeymen. So you may work at Pixar for 5 years, and then you work at another place for 5 years, and then you pick up a little bit of freelance, and then you're trying to navigate a landscape that's always changing. Always.
I suppose that means that when you are getting your education and focusing on things like fundamentals, stuff that's not going to change, color theory, lettering, typography, anatomy, things that are evergreen skills as opposed to
business
business or versus software, because by the time you graduate, that they're not using
what QuickBooks, I don't know,
Digital Darkroom was the software back in the day, pre-Photoshop. They might be learning something, or a version of Photoshop that doesn't exist anymore.
Well, how about Print Shop? Remember that?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think the biggest one that came and went was Flash. Everybody was learning Flash 20 years ago. Right. The internet ran on Flash. It was like the thing that was sort of like one of the backbones. So I remember going and taking Flash classes to learn Flash, and now nobody uses it. Right. But
I know one or two cartoonists who still use it as their drawing tool, but you can thank iPad for that.
Right. So I was thinking at that time, working in animation, that it would be a good thing for me to learn this technology, because they weren't going to teach it to me. That's another big thing about all of this. If you're working at Pixar, so you've made it pretty high up the chain, working at one of the biggest studios, if they bring in something, a new technology, then you're valuable to the company. You'll learn on it. They'll teach you how to do it. If not, and it starts becoming some sort of industry standard, it's up to you to go and learn that new technology. So there's a lot of moving parts to all this. Steve's right. I believe that most of my success comes from my core skills being very high, which gives me the most flexibility. Right? If you want to make your living drawing, the better you draw, I think the better chance you have to make a living drawing, right?
It makes so much sense. It's almost too simple. Right?
And that's one of the things I would say to the students. If you want to make your living like I do, drawing comics or doing storyboards or doing kids' books, all the various things I've done, that all came because of my drawing. Right? That's why somebody wants to hire me, because of my drawing. So if you want to make your living like that, then the better your drawing, better chance you have of getting jobs working on like cool stuff that requires you to have good drawing, right? Because everybody wants to hire the best people that they can, right? So, but there are some people who, let's say, are not so good at drawing, but they're good at something else. They're good at something else. And the hardest thing is that when you're in college, colleges are reactive. They're not proactive. So you can go into a school and they could we heard that, some thing is important, so we will get you to buy that program. And then the teacher will try to teach you that program.
Where the teacher probably is learning how to use it right on top of teaching you how to do it.
Exactly.
Real rap.
Right, exactly. I mean, I saw that happen all the time, right? Yeah. Now, that's for commercial art. Fine art, you can do whatever you want. It's about you expressing yourself in the way that you choose to. Because no one's going to say, you must make an oil painting, or you must do a watercolor, or you must use mixed media. It's what you want, right? But if you're working in a commercial sense, you have to have an overall understanding of what the field is. And I can tell you, the last 4 or 5 years, the entire field of entertainment is really churning, right? Major publishers there's a lot of churn. So your responsibility to yourself is to understand the environment as it is now and maybe where it's going. Like most people don't think when they're in college to read the trades or to understand what's going on with Disney or Apple or Microsoft or whatever. But, I have friends who were working on stuff for Microsoft, got killed. There goes your job, right? Some boardroom made a decision somewhere, right? So I think it's really comprehensive. It's much more complex now than in the beginning of my career because everything was still sort of the same. It had been comics had been made the same way. They weren't using computers. They weren't doing all that stuff yet. Desktop publishing hadn't really come in when I started in the 80s. Then slowly everybody kind of came on. And I think it was actually easier in that way to adopt that as the companies slowly adopted. And comics was one of the last ones because comics was always done a certain way. But eventually the printer goes, we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing hand separations anymore.
Right.
So you want to print Spider-Man, you got to switch over to the system. Right. So I think it's a multifaceted approach that you have to have of understanding the business, the environment of the business, what you want to do in that business, and then what do you have to do what you want to do.
Right.
Yeah. I have. This is one of my favorite commercials. This is from a couple of years ago. So the setup is this busy administrative assistant is walking through this really bustling office with this guy behind him who's got like the I just graduated college haircut, and he's walking around like with his nose up at everything. And over here, this is editorial, and this is the mail room, and over here is this, and here's the copying machine. And she like kind of puts her hands on it, like looking at him, and he goes, "Copy machine, I have an MBA." And then she says, "Okay, I guess I'm going to have to show you how to use it then."
Yeah.
Right. So one thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is that there's the little bit of, I don't want to say entitlement, maybe the conceit of just graduating from college or coming from a thing where you think that you know stuff, which you don't really know anything, but you're going to get taught on the job. So if you can kind of get out of your own way, and kind of like our good buddy Robert Alvarez, who's in the chat, said, I learned what I knew on the job, not in art school. Your learning kind of starts at your first gig. You know what I mean? And along with the stories that we've been hearing for countless guest interviews is that people were working on a thing, somebody comes to the door and goes, "Hey, you think you could do this other thing over here?" Okay. And then they go do that thing. You know what I mean? Which sounds really like alien to a lot of people.
Which goes back to the networking point that you always bring up. The idea that having the skills enough to be welcome into the community, that when an opportunity like that becomes available, that someone thinks of you for that gig. I'm sure that's how maybe Judge Parker or Phantom ended up your way, Mike. Someone's like, okay, we need someone for this. Oh, Mike Manley might be available.
You make yourself useful. You network, right? So the reason I got both of those strips, because in 2008, I did 4 King features, that Secret Agent X9 jobs that were for Egmont.
Where you killed me, right?
Right, where I killed Jamar.
Yeah.
They loved how I killed him. They thought that was so good. They were like, we're going to hire.
Lasers. It was with lasers, I think. You didn't notice it was very bloody.
It was with lasers, yeah.
So, because I had a good relationship with the editor there, and I did a good job, when he had something else, he remembered me, right? the worst thing you can do when you're young is to fuck up a job, burn a bridge, make somebody mad at you. Because now that person is never going to talk nice about you, right? They're never going to recommend you for anything. And in my experience, 99% of my jobs come through networking, come through, I know someone who knew someone who need, oh yeah, why don't you get Mike? That's how that whole thing happened with that Mystery Science Theater 3000 comic. Because I'm doing an old-fashioned comic strip that's sort of like that era that they were trying to do in the comic.
Right.
Somebody thought, oh, this is a guy who might be able to do that. Right. So you never know where your opportunity is going to come, but you also want to make sure that when you have an opportunity, you don't burn a bridge. You don't burn a person that you're easy to work with.
I think it could sound like to the uninitiated, like that's luck. Well, you were lucky. That was lucky. Like you just happened to be. But also, you know, I think I'm a really good example of kind of creating paths for myself. Almost everything that I've done didn't exist before I did it, and that's not a flex. You know, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of an amalgamation of everything we're talking about. You know, I network well. People know who I am. I try to do good work. I try not to piss people off or burn bridges.
Right.
And then, you know, once in a while somebody says, hey, what do you want to do? Oh, I have this thing. Oh, great, let's talk. Is that luck? I can't say that's luck. It's, you know what I'm saying?
I don't really believe in luck.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in preparation meeting opportunity. Because there's many people we know, all three of us know, who blew opportunities because they were not prepared when the opportunity came by. You had a bad attitude that day. Mm-hmm. You had a mean face on. Mm-hmm. Or you weren't in the right state of mind. Or you're not a person that's easy to get along with.
You bite off more than you can chew.
Hold on, Mike. Hold on. I call that my Uncle Ben moment, when you could have stopped the robber after he ran off with the purse. You're like, yo, Spider-Man, stop that dude. He just robbed the gate. Hey, that's not my problem.
I mean, I know a lot of guys when I was getting into comics in the 80s that were like hot or cool, but they burned a lot of deadlines, right? Mm. So if you burn a deadline, there's very few guys who can burn a deadline and continue to get work, right? Because you cost the company money.
Right.
When an issue of a comic book is late, it costs the company money because they have to have something else to put in its place, or the printer's going to charge you a fee.
Right.
Nobody getting into comic books thinks about that. Right? Nobody getting into comics and wanting to draw your own, draw Spider-Man or draw your own. Nobody thinks about things like that. But that is actually very important. So I think opportunities come to people who are open to them, but also prepared to take advantage of an opportunity when it's presented. Because you can get an opportunity and completely blow it.
Yeah. I remember, I left my gig when I was working for USA Today, and I said, I'm going to freelance. This was like 1995. And I'm like, I need a cell phone. And that, oh man, is it there? I have to find it. It's this chunky ass monster of a thing, but I needed it because if the phone rings and I can't pick it up, the job's going to go to somebody else. If they'll call somebody, and if I don't pick up, well, he's not available. We'll call somebody else. So I don't know if it was that. Sometimes that felt a little bit like luck. Maybe somebody else didn't pick up and I got the gig, but having that phone on me meant that I could get a chance. Oh yeah, I can do that. Whatever it is, I can do that.
Just say yes.
I think it's true. it's one of those Hollywoodisms, like, you know, the starving artist and the artist who is suffering, and you know, there's a lot of fantasy baked in to our occupation, where, you know, artists are flighty or what. There's a lot of stuff like that, and I think that luck is one of those things. Like, oh, you're lucky you went to the right school. You're lucky you know the right. But I know people personally who blew chances and had bad attitudes. And another thing I think I always mention to people is to not let, because we all get disappointed, we all get treated unfairly, we all get somebody shitting on us. That's part of working in this business. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to be a person who lets that turn them to the thing where you're always saying, well, I would have had that if this thing would have happened to me, if all these people have it out for me because. And there's people like that. I would tell students like that, because you have some students that aren't doing well and they become like the negative students, and the negative students want to get more negative students because it makes them feel better. We can all go, that teacher's shitty. This is a shitty class. And it's like, don't fall for that okie doke. Don't, because there are some people, that's what they do. That's why they won't go anywhere, because they're on that negative track.
The only thing I've heard the luck conversation happen a couple of times. The only thing I'd want to push back on is there are some people who have not had successful careers, and I don't think it was all because they didn't do those things that we're talking about. Right. I think you can have a lot of those things and still not make it. I think we can have all these ingredients, but if the phone doesn't ring, if the opportunity doesn't come, those things, I still feel like you have to account for that and not say that that's somehow a failure of their personality or a failure of their education. I just want to give that caveat that there are people out there who are fantastic, but the stars don't align. But I agree with you that having those tools makes success. Without those tools, success is impossible. But you can have those tools and still not. You know,
I don't know anybody that has those tools that is not successful.
Well, you travel in rarefied circles.
No, I mean,
look at these three faces on your screen.
You know, I mean, I think if you are doing those things, then you also create opportunity by moving forward, right? Because it's not an even playing field. That's the other thing. It's not where everybody starts on the block at the same place. Everybody gets the same opportunities. Everybody, it's just not that way. Some people have more advantages. Some people have less advantages. Yeah. But I think the people that I know who are successful made the most of whatever they had. I mean, I didn't live in California, and I didn't live in New York. So as a teenager, I had shit opportunity in Michigan to be able to work as a professional cartoonist. If I had lived in California or I lived in New York, I'm sure I could have been more successful earlier because I had enough skill maybe to become an assistant. But because of where I lived, there was no opportunity for that. Right, there were no cartoonists. There was no business there for me to go and to do what I wanted to do. Right, so if I know many people who lived in New York or New Jersey or Connecticut who got jobs young because that's where they lived and they could go and see something.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah, and the point I was making wasn't meant to say that. Because people often think that introducing luck somehow undermines the success. Like if luck exists, therefore any success I've had is somehow lessened because, or I had to work less or something like that. And if you know, as I mentioned before, bathed in privilege. I don't discount advantages I've had growing up Long Island, New York, you know, the United States. When I grew up, the idea that Macs had just come out and could help do things like that could raise me out of my situation. That's a lot of stars aligning that helped. And if I didn't jump on those opportunities, other opportunities would have presented themselves. I mean, the opportunity I could even afford to have a cell phone in '95 was the thing where it's like that opened up opportunities for me that other people didn't have.
That's a lot of Malcolm Gladwell right there.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean I got a lot of sleep or saw a lot of sunlight. You know, it was a lot of work.
And you know, the thing is I think you can get caught in that. I didn't, you know, what was it, red buttons? You know, I never got a did. You know, I never got a. You know, I never got an opportunity, and I just think that won't help you. That attitude won't help you. You have to reconfigure, you have to study, you have to figure out what is your path forward. And we see that happening right now with a lot of people in my generation. You know, with what's happening with animation and the entertainment industry, there's a lot of people that are like mid-career. It's like, I haven't worked in 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
Right? What do you do? What do you do? Do you go take an early retirement, or do you have to figure out another path? So,
well, thinking about networking, for a little while there, maybe 10 years ago, there was another way of doing that with social networks. But given that those seem to be deteriorating, there's two parts of that. I know a lot of younger cartoonists who don't have the body of work yet, but are spending at least 80% of their time networking and 20% of their time drawing. These numbers are there's a large margin of error in these numbers. But what skills should you have before you begin networking, and then what do you think networking is going to look like over the next 5 years?
I mean,
that's how I feel.
I mean, I think one of the negative things about social media is that it tends to, like, you're a boomer and you're a zoomer and you're an Xer and you're a thiser and you're a thater. And I think as an artist, as a cartoonist, it shouldn't be like, well, the person who is 20 doesn't listen to the person who's 60, and the person who is 70 doesn't listen to the person that's 20. I think that I see the people are too much into camps, and that's not a good thing to be in a camp. I think you should be open to learning and networking with anyone. I can learn something. I learned, even though I had assistants who were younger than me, you know, I learned stuff from them as they learned stuff from me. That's the way it should be. But I think too often it's things are walled off. Things are walled off, right? And I don't think that's a good thing from social media. I don't think, you know, I mean, the idea that you don't want to be on the thing because your mom is on it means that there might be a lot of cartoonists or artists on there. So, but you don't want to be on there because your mom's going to see your tweet or whatever. I think
my lip tat.
Right. I think the ability for anyone to talk to almost anyone today and get some useful information is unprecedented, as much as we can say that there's negative things about, you know, social media. Mm-hmm. I think as a young artist, the fact that you can talk to so many artists in the area you want to go into, that I couldn't even imagine that when I was 17 or even when I was 30. It just didn't exist, you know? It just didn't exist. And internationally, let's not, you know, I mean, the world was much smaller when I was getting into comics, I couldn't talk to somebody in France or somebody in Japan, or they couldn't talk to us. So again, you should be looking for an opportunity to expand your horizon and always self-reflecting on what can I do better? What opportunity can I make? What opportunity can I try to create for myself? I mean, I know people that are working now have nice careers because in the early 2000s, they were using the internet as a way of getting their work out in front of people, which then eventually clicked. So, again, nothing is ever going to be perfect. Nothing has ever been perfect.
I think there's something to be said about, you said, getting their work out. When I know there are a lot of people who, and this might get a little sensitive, you guys. There's a lot of people that talk about working, but they are not working. Right. I have, and even, my old students or my old employees, I used to tell very basic monthly things you can do to move yourself forward. Do something every month. Do one thing a month. Yep. Do one thing every 2 weeks. By the end of the year, you've done, 12 things professionally that will move you forward. That's not insurmountable. But I think a lot of people get caught up in talking about the clicks and all that kind of stuff.
It's the allocation of your time. Like if you want to do a newspaper strip, they want to see like at least a month's worth of stuff. Then that might mean that you do a month's worth of strips that don't get you the job, but get you a conversation with someone that it might lead to you doing another month of strips and maybe another month of strips, right? It's like the thing is that you can also make your own opportunity by creating something and getting it out there. A lot of people feel like, well, I don't want to put it up on the web because people are going to steal it. People are going to take my idea. Well, if you only have one idea and somebody took it, well, you're going to be in trouble.
So someone asked me, why would I make my comic free? It's like, well, on the worst case scenario, everyone steals it. It's like, worst case scenario, everyone in the world has my comic and has read my comic, because the only way they can get the next one is to come to me. So I'm totally fine with that. Going back to Jamar's point about the people who talk about it, it's social media contributes to that in a big way, because if you announce something, you can get a lot of upvotes without ever doing a lick of work. And I've seen that a lot of times when people want to talk about their projects and not do their projects. And to me, I know that's a weakness for me too. That's why I often don't talk about them until they're done. I know that if I can get it out of my system in some other way, if I tell the story, if I tell my story to somebody else, the one I'm writing, if I tell it to somebody else, then it's out of my system and I don't feel that burning need to finish it. I want to have that reaction from people. So, and the only way to get that is by getting the comic out. So I just don't tell them. I've got one or two people who are like, I will bounce ideas off of or something like that, but it's got to be real specific so that the people I desperately want to tell the story to, I remain desperate, because it'd be so easy just to talk it out and be done and not have to go through the ordeal of drawing.
Right. And I think that's a slippery slope, especially when you're a young creator who is maybe in my metaphorical scenario, let's say you're part of some sort of like internet clash. Like you have this crew of people on Facebook and there's a group and everybody is some sort of personality that talks a really big talk. There's gossip. There's all that kind of like, oh, I went to this guy's show. He sucks. Whatever happens in these little like internal things. But nobody's really making any work. And it's easy to kind of get caught up in a high school loop of trying to impress, a small amount of people when no one's really moving forward or making work. You know what I'm saying? I think it comes back down to, are you making pages? Or are you talking about making pages?
Right.
How many people do you know that have like a shelf in their houses full of how to do things, but don't even read them or do the things that are on the spine of those books.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. The people that
You know,
have all the art books, they never never really read them.
The,
Maybe
odor,
they
the
flip
spine
through
cracks. You can hear it the first time it opens.
them. Yeah. I think it's all in the doing. Opportunity comes from forward motion. If you want to do comics, then do comics. Just do a lot of comics. Hopefully, while you're doing those comics, you're also getting better. And if you're not getting the response to your work that you desire, then maybe you have to look at what you're doing. Maybe you have to look at, because it's like you can work smart, you can work hard, and you can work smart. Even doing a really bad comic book is a lot of work. Doing 22 pages of.
I did 3.
Right. Right. Again, and I mean, it's all these things are part of it's all layered, right? Using the social media, moving forward, making art, contacting people, understanding the environment. The environment is constantly changing. And like I said, if I look at my first 20 years, it was pretty much the same. Now it's not. In the last 2 years, it's really not, because we really don't know yet what AI is going to do. But I do know that it's not going away, and that kids are using it now to write their term papers, and businesses are using it. So AI is going to come in, and it's going to radically change things in ways that we cannot yet predict. But if you're working and you're trying to sell your vision, your talent as an artist, what do you have to offer that AI can't make?
It's something funny. Adobe sent out a survey a little while ago saying, typical thing, and I always answer it because, and it was like, would you recommend this to other people? And I think asked me if I recommend Adobe. I think I gave them a 3 out of 10, and I said why? I said because you guys embraced this derivative AI. People have been calling generative AI derivative AI, and I feel like that's a better term. You guys have been embracing derivative AI, and that it's actively harmful to young people. I just sent it off. That's it. No one's going to read this thing. Enter it. About a month later, after I think it was, and not coincidentally, after the Procreate company, the CEO posted that video. I don't know if you saw it, where he says I effing hate AI, and said that Procreate will not embrace it. I got contacted by Adobe and said, do you want to talk to someone on our team? And so I scheduled it, and we talked. It was scheduled for 20 minutes. We talked for 40. At some point, I'll put together a little recap, but I don't want to betray it here. But one of the things they were talking about, they were trying to spin it like, one of the sales things of AI was that, let's say you have this thing generate all these images, and you share one of those images with a client, and the client looks at it and goes, yeah, but can we get it just a little different? Then they're screwed, because they can't give you a little different. They can just give you from a menu of a million options. They're rolling dice every time they get an image spit out from that machine. So that seemed like a very temporary weakness of the system, but they are thinking about AI as being something that still artists, at least competent artists, still have a fighting chance in the short term. So I don't know. Even Adobe feels like but like you said, who knows where it'll be in 5 years? Who knows where it's all going?
Guys, we have a couple of. I starred a couple of things in the chat. Our resident new syndicated strip artist, D. Parson, in the chat says, I know in this day and age, I don't know if I'd have the heart to encourage anyone else to tackle syndication. Admittedly, I was tricked into this business. There's a lot of things that schools can't really teach that are necessary for handling a script. Most importantly, maintaining a consistent deadline. So I mean, this isn't really a question, more of like a statement of fact. And even like a dream fulfilled, it's like, and I talk about kind of everything like as ladders or stair steps. It's like, okay, you got here. What's on the step above you? Like you got here. Let's bite the coin. You got a medal. Great. Now what? Now what? You know what I mean? And syndication, and bless you, D and Mike and Tahid and all you guys. That's really it's a treadmill you don't get off of. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? So it's like now you're on this thing and you have to kind of keep reinventing ways for you to keep being creative and fresh. And that's fantastic. You know what I mean? But I don't want to talk, I don't want to kind of answer for D or put words in D's mouth. But I think it's just an interesting thing to have a dream, and then when it's fulfilled, now new things happen, in front of it. So just being adaptive is what we talked about before we went online. It's just, and even getting something and keeping something are two different things. But D, you're fine. You have a long career ahead of you. So I mean, I think there's even something to be said about that. It's like, and I would hate for somebody to listen to our live cast tonight and go, must be easy for you to say, Steve Conley. Must be easy for you to say, Mike Manley, in your house full of tchotchkes and books and Steve Canyon strips. You know what I'm saying? Like
I don't have one Steve Canyon strip.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like I don't want to come off as like the old man who was like saying boomer shit to people.
Again, see, I reject all that ageism bullshit, because I think you learn from anybody at any age. You learn from anywhere you can.
Yeah.
You can learn from a 15-year-old how to do something, you take that information and you do it. If you can learn from a 90-year-old, you take that information and you use it. I'm doing digital now mainly because when Mimi was here, she worked digitally. I saw how she did it, and then she helped me set up my Cintiq to be able to do it. Right? I don't know if I would have gone over in the same way or as easily if I didn't have her assistance to help me. Right? Same way with Liang. Right? It was more native to them than it was to me.
Right.
Right. So I look at that as an opportunity to learn something from someone who was younger that helped me. Right. I just reject all that. That is marketing. Marketing wants to make you a boomer or a Gen Z or a Gen X, because that's how they're going to try to market to you. Like saying, oh, nobody can wear short white socks now, or just some crazy bullshit. Right. I think as artists, you have to just sort of reject all that laboring, reject all that stuff. You can learn from anybody at any time. You can learn anything if you're open to do it. Now, some artists are not. Some artists are very narrow, very narrowly focused. You might be able to be very narrow and very narrowly focused, and you may have success. But again, working in commercial art, you're not in control of the market. You're not in control of market forces. You're not in control of publishing. You're not in control of distribution. Right? You're not in control of any of that stuff. Right? If tomorrow DC said everything's all digital, well then you're not in control of that. If you're going to work for them, you're going to work in a certain way. If you don't want to work in that way, then you're not going to work for them. So I think you can do a disservice to yourself by being that. To me, that's a fine art mentality. A fine art mentality would be that I only want to create paintings of this subject matter with this technique which you can't because you're just serving yourself. But
I'm doing triangles, Mike Manley.
right, exactly. I just want to explore the mystery and the sensuality of a triangle. You don't get to do that as a commercial artist, and especially people working now. Like I said, there's so much more churn in the business now, so many more requirements on you as the artist to be able to suddenly work with a different program, a different way. There's a lot more pressure put on you as the artist to adapt to whatever particular software that when I bought my computer, my first Apple computer in 1994, Marvel wasn't telling me to do that. DC wasn't telling me to do that. But I could see that's where everything was going. They were going to buy me a computer. They were going to tell me how to use it. But I saw that I needed to do that because that's the way things were going. So to me, that's the attitude to have. What do I need to do? What do I need to overcome? What do I need to adapt to? Some things are not going to be things that you want to do, but they're going to be things that you have to do. And if you're working in commercial art, there's a lot of things that you have to do because that's the nature of the beast.
What do you laugh at, Steve?
Well, because the contrary was the things you have to do and don't want to do. And in commercial art, Mark, he focused on the things you have to do. Because in commercial art, there's a lot of things you don't want to do. Yeah, that was the other side of that coin. Yeah, there's a lot. Commercial art's almost defined by things you don't want to do.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, my temperament would be to do everything on paper, the traditional way. I would much prefer that. I would much prefer to have the original. I would much prefer to use a pen and a brush on a nice piece of Strathmore Bristol. That's the aesthetic that I like the most. But the reality is doing the strips digitally allows me to work faster. Allowed me to work during COVID with my assistant that I would not have been able to do because of COVID. Right? So it's like I have to adapt to be able to do this in a way that allows me to produce the strips. So now if I was going to be the kind of person like, no, I'm going to use only this and only this way, then all I do is I make it more difficult for myself. And I know artists that are that way. They go, this is how I want to do it. There was a story I remember that Mimi told me. She and Liang had a teacher, an old long-time children's book illustrator who made the class meet him at the Philadelphia Public Library. Fuck Google. Well, I'm going to take you down to the reference library and we're going to dig through old files and blah, 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 blah. So he made everybody meet him down there. And then when they go in, it's like, oh, yeah, that old paper, research library. Yeah, that's all digital now.
Oh, wow. So he kind of played himself.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean,
he had a good point, though, right? His heart was in the right place, right?
I think the idea that you can show somebody. Look, I still have a morgue. I have a morgue for like 40 years that I started clipping magazines and everything. But I think you have to be able to, at some point, go, it's not worth it. It's not working. The mentality should be, I should use whatever I have to use in order to get my job done, right? But not be so stuck on the idea that, I'm going to go down to, the old morgue and dig through this stuff. I just think that, you could go to the library, but now it's all going to be on microfilm. Right. So I'm saying that you can get stuck in ways of thinking that don't really serve you, that actually make it more difficult for you and make it more difficult for people to work with you. Anything that makes it more difficult for people to work for you is not good for you.
One thing I talk about a lot on this show and other things, part of the JNN JAMAR Nicholas Network, is the idea, and kind of when I started that whole boomer thing, is the idea of, I think, sometimes younger people look at stuff that older people have and go, oh, well, you must have obtained this stuff when it was easy, or the things that you have I can't have now because you did it back then when when potato chips were 10 cents a bag. And that's not necessarily how this stuff works. But that was kind of what I was touching on. Is just kind of like, I think there's also on the young side the idea that whatever you have doesn't relate to the world that we live in now. You know what I mean? Kind of like you live in a cloud in some fashion. One thing I wanted to say real quick, because I was thinking about this whole like college thing, is, and going and vicariously living through a lot of my buddies who've been sitting in college orientation classes while their kids are moving into the dorms across campus, is, just imagine sitting in this auditorium with a bunch of folders on your lap and thinking about how much money you just deposited into the bursar's office. And
no, let's not think about that.
And asking, this person on the stage, what does my kid need to be successful here? You know what I mean? Or like they sent home all of these papers that, now they need a laptop and they need this and they need that and they need this and they need that. And my thought to you guys came into kind of like the preparedness thing that we've been talking about as a young person who wanted to do this stuff at a professional level when you were young. And I'm wondering if maybe young people have that same kind of impetus to want to do that. So what I'm saying is, would you already have this stuff or be circling it and earmarking it like, these are the things I need to be an animator? Like somebody's not going to tell me on a back to school list that I need Toon Boom Pro. Like, about that stuff already. You probably have it already, that kind of stuff. I wonder how many students are waiting to be taught versus students who are already waiting to get instructed and already know. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the chief things I did teaching was to illuminate the path to go towards your goal. Because so many young people that I would meet who are interested in art, they go, I want to be an animator, I want to be this. They don't really know what that is. They may not even know, they might not even be able to name an animator, right? They'd want to be an animator, but they couldn't name a single animator, a single animation director. Maybe they might say Miyazaki or something. Right. But they have this dream. But to me, in order to take that dream and make that dream a reality, the dream part is you have in the start. I want to do this thing, right? But then the real work comes from like, okay, here's what I want to do, and there it is ahead of me at some point. What is the path that I have to go to do that? And every one of these, if you're going to be an animator, that's a specific path. A cartoonist working for Marvel, that's a specific path, right? Being a children's book illustrator, that's a specific path. Right. They may all have certain things in common, like, drawing, composition, anatomy, and a lot of things in common. But each specific, it's like going to a city, right? If one's in Tibet and, one's in the middle of the jungle, and one's in the desert, Well, you got to prepare to go. And most of the students that I meet have the, dream. They don't really know how to get there. They don't really know what you need to get there. What they have is the desire, and the people at school goes, oh yeah, we'll teach you that. Want to be an animator? Yeah, we'll teach you that.
Be careful.
Be
very careful.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So, and then what happens is, and this is many, many schools, they don't really prepare the student, and they're not rigorous enough so that when the student graduates, they're not really prepared, because it's not really about grades. It's about skill. And in art school, there's too much about giving everybody a B and giving them good grades, but that doesn't translate into being good enough to animate for Walt Disney. And if you want to animate, where do you animate? Like, who is hiring animators?
Right.
Where can you animate? Do you want to be a 3D animator or a 2D animator? Where can you get a job making a middle-class living as an animator? Nobody knows in high school. Most people don't know in college. They just don't know. So they have this idea, but they're not, they haven't really investigated it. A lot of what I did was explain to a person, like, if you want to do that, there's a certain schools that I would recommend, because, and they're hard to get into, so you might not be able to get in right away. You might have to work hard to get in, but the people that come out of that school are better prepared to be able to try to go into that particular part of the business, right?
Is there also a part that we're not recognizing, is, because we've said this a lot, it's like the old kind of ladder of how people do things in America is, you go to school, you get good grades, you get into a good college, you get a job, you get a family, you retire. That's kind of how that's supposed to work.
Yeah, but I mean, are you going to be an MBA? You're going to be a business thing. It's like, as a teenager, I figured if I was going to work for Marvel, the one thing, really the only thing I had to do, was to get good enough that they would hire me. It was like the very narrow requirement, right?
Right.
Like, if I want to draw Spider-Man, I have to make samples good enough that the editor of Spider-Man would go, yeah, that's not bad. I'll give you a tryout, right? So for me, it seemed like the goal was simpler and clearer, in that I figured if I was good enough to get good enough, they would hire me, right? It didn't seem like there was anything else I had to do,
right,
but do that. But I think if you're going to be an animator and you want to be a 2D animator, the world is a lot more complicated now, because one of the things they're doing is trying to figure out how to use AI to do all the 2D animation they possibly can, right? So again, you have to understand more fully the business you want to go into. Like, nobody thinks twice about that as a doctor. Nobody thinks twice about that as a musician. You're going to be a composer. You're going to compose music. Well, what are you going to compose music for? Where are you going to compose music? If you're going to do classical music, there's a certain path to be able to become Philip Glass, right? A certain path to become a doctor, a certain path to become a lawyer, right? I think it's harder with art, because we can sort of lie to ourselves, and we can sort of have the vision or the dream of being an animator or having your own show on Cartoon Network or whatever. But like Cartoon Network doesn't even exist now. Not like it did, right? And when I would explain to a young animation student that how you get your show on Cartoon Network is you work for Cartoon Network. So they get to know you, and then you move your way up working for them. So the people in the company get to know you, so that when you go and you pitch them a show, you have a track record. Oh yeah, you worked on this show, that show, done this, done that. I know you. You're a proven, you made me money. You're a proven talent. You made me money. I know you. Right. It's not just walking in and like throwing some shit down and going like, well, where's my show? Right. So I think part of it is you can't just have the dream. You have to educate yourself. And it's a really hard thing because most people don't do it. Most of the students I've taught don't really do it. Some do, but most don't. So my biggest thing when I was teaching the high school class, I was always meet all these kids who had the dream. And what I would try to do is explain to them, great, you got this dream. Now you got to figure out your path. If you can't, can you afford art school? Can you not afford art school? If you want to be an animator, then you got to know animators. You got to study animate. You can do animate. You can animate yourself now. There's all these programs you can get for free to animate. You know, study it. Not just say, oh, I want to be an animator, like in some abstract thing. That's where most people fall off because it goes from the fantasy part, which sounds fun, to the reality part, which is hard work. Right. And like nobody taught me to be a cartoonist. I taught myself to be a cartoonist. I didn't go to school to be a cartoonist. I became a cartoonist through practice and interest. Because when I was a kid, I mean, I couldn't go to the Kubert school, which was the only school that I knew about. I think Buscema had a school briefly, but I couldn't. So my path was practice, go to a show, show my work, get a crit, get depressed, get mad, go back. You know, in fact, today on my Facebook page, you'll see there's a page on there, scrap of a page, of a Fantastic Four story that I drew in probably 1979. And I went to a convention and I met Walt Simonson. It was very nice. And he gave me a very nice critique. But when I got home, I was really mad at myself. I tore it up. But I still have a couple scraps from that job, right? So that's what's going to happen. You're going to get you're not always going to get the answer that you want. And you got to somehow, you know, lick your wounds and get the fire in your belly again. And that's why I think today the internet is so great for young artists talking to more experienced people. That never existed. You know, I'd have to wait a couple times a year to take my stuff and show it to somebody. And it might even be somebody I wasn't a big fan, but like, this is a person here, they're working, I'm not working, so they know something I don't. You know? So
if more people thought like that, Mike.
You know, well, I would say that very often. I would know people that would go in the comic book store and they would look at stuff on the shelf and they would go, this guy fucking sucks. Why is he getting work and I'm not getting work? Because he's doing something you're not. That person is doing something you're not. So what you should be asking yourself, what is he doing that I can do that will maybe put me in a better position to get work?
That's the Wednesday tin can kicking at the comedy shop.
Right.
These guys suck. How come he's got a solo book? Ugh.
And is that person being honest with themselves? It's so easy to be dishonest and to trick yourself and to say that you're doing it when you're really not. You say that your work is better when it's not. I think it's really easy for artists to fool themselves. And your parents and your friends can't draw worth shit. So they're like, "Oh, Jimmy's great. Look at that. Look at that. That's wonderful. That's wonderful."
Hercules.
Right. And I mean, I see that. I even see that to a degree, like I say, in art school. I think that's one of the biggest problems in art school is that people will get a B that doesn't really reflect their skill set, but it reflects the effort within that environment. But that's not really honest, because if they were outside of that environment, people wouldn't be saying that.
Well, isn't that the conundrum of art school grading?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like somebody's gonna say, how could they give you a grade for art? There's a whole other thing we're not going to get into tonight. But hold on, before we get out of here, there was a question that our good buddy Bill O'Donnell put in, and this was kind of towards the beginning of the thing we were talking about, kind of skill building. And from all of our guests who over the years have been on the show, talk about how they jump from this thing to that thing to this thing to that thing to this thing. Bill asks, what were some of the benefits of doing storyboards versus comics or pinups? So, Mike, maybe can you speak to maybe some skill strengthening from doing these different things into your tool belt, your utility belt of skills?
Well, one of the things about working in animation is you're now working in your style, whatever your style is, right? So if I'm working on Superman or Batman, I'm working in Bruce's style. Right, Bruce Timm's is the main designer. So what you're doing then is you're concentrating on storytelling. You're concentrating on film language, which is different than comics, because in comics there's a lot that can happen in between panels. You can like I would say, Jack Kirby is a fantastic storyteller. Neil Adams was not as good a storyteller as Jack Kirby. He was a fantastic draftsman. And a lot of times he would sell something through his drawing because the drawing was so good. But that would not work in film, because when you're working in animation, everything has to work. The acting has to work. The composition has to work. It's much more complicated. So I think I was a natural storyboard artist because my brain always saw what I drew almost like an animation. Like when I'm drawing, I think of the characters alive like animation. Probably because I watched so much animation as a kid. So, again, a pinup, you're just selling that one image, right? It's not related to another image. There's nothing coming before, nothing coming after it. And in comic books, you can be an okay storyteller, but a fantastic draftsman, and it will have a lot of impact. Where in animation, if you're not a good storyteller, the film won't have the emotional power that you want to have. And the thing that you have going for you that helps you is you don't have to worry about style. In comics, everybody's always worried about style. How am I drawing this? How am I making this cool? I got to have a cool style. Young people are always obsessed with style. But when I work on an animated show, it's not my style. It's the style of the show, right? Everybody working on that show is working in the same style. It's not your style per se, unless you were the guy that came up with the show. So it's very different and very freeing in that way, but it's also very, very hard work mentally, taking a script and turning it into film, in film language, and understanding film language, which has some similarity to comics, but comics has a lot more cheats than film.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks, Bill.
If that makes sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
And we have one more. We're going to wheels up in a minute, you guys, but this is getting good. And it always makes me laugh when everybody starts to really settle into it and starts asking questions right before we end the show. But Harlan Littlejohn says, growing, I got the exact opposite reactions. I love drawing, but man, I really have a toxic relationship with it. How do y'all keep that passion alive and maintain a good relationship with art? Steve Conley, how do you answer that question?
Well, I had very supportive parents when it came to art. The first question my dad asked me about it was, "Can you make a living at it?" And for some reason, as a kid, I said yes. I don't know what.
What was wrong with you?
I was wrong. No, I was confident. I thought, why not? I thought, why couldn't I? Why couldn't I make a living at it? But I don't know. I always had a good relationship because I never made it something I didn't want to do. It was always something where the work that was paying me better was almost always something that was the stuff I didn't really want to do. Like if I was going to design a website, or not that I didn't want to do it, but it was more like that wasn't where my heart was. And comics and cartooning and telling the stories I want to tell were always kind of why I feel like I was here on this, So I don't know. I never really connected it with negativity. There's a great book called Art and Fear. Who is it? There's like David Bales and Ted Orland.
Oh, that's a different. I'm used to the Pressfield War of Art book.
No, it's called Observations on the Perils and Rewards of Art Making.
Huh.
And it is excellent. It's a lot of basic stuff, but it's a lot of stuff. It's often like, if anything, it's things that good reminders. Good reminders. I'll put a link to it in the. I don't know if it'll show. I'll put the Amazon link here. But again, Art and Fear: Observations on the Perils and Rewards of Art Making. But right out of the gate, it says, okay, there are genius savants who show up every once in a while, and you're not one of them. But it's basically that's at page 1. Say your odds are you're not one of those people. You're not Mozart. Odds are you're going to be working at this, and that is I don't know. That felt like a good bracing way to start it, because a lot of people are like, if you're the special boy, you're going to do great. That'll run out of steam pretty quick.
And it can also, that can mess you. That can mess you up, because people can give you a false sense of where you are, and then when you hit a hard part, then you're not the special boy anymore.
Or a big fish in a very little pond.
Yeah.
You find yourself in a slightly larger pond. You're suddenly like, oh wow, there's a, and that's not even the major leagues yet.
Well, that's one of the really great parts about going to art school, is that you kind of break that out of yourself really early. When you were like the kid on the field who was an art kid in your whole town, and then you go to the big city and you're like, a fish in this pool, in this pond. Yeah. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I want to know what a toxic relationship is with your art. Like, like you sit down and draw it, and then you're like, oh, I hate it, and you tear it up. I mean, part of it is that there is frustration, but I think you have to love it enough in order to keep doing it, because you have to do it. The main difference, I think, between a person who is a professional that does it every day and a person who is a hobbyist who does it when they want. The hobbyist does it until the love sort of,
Right.
leaves, and then you go, oh, okay, I'm done. And you may come back tomorrow. You may not come back for 6 months because it's your hobby, right? And even if you love it, having to do it regular every day, it's a different mindset and personality. So I would want to know, like, define toxic. Is it disappointment or frustration, which we all have?
Yeah. Harlan's added some context here with a follow-up post to say, just to put things in perspective, I was not only discouraged by my parents, but punished for trying to pursue art. So it may have may have not given the best description of my situation. So the idea of being discouraged by parents. Were your parents encouraging, Jamar, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, with a heaping side of, you have to take this seriously. Like, I think my thing was, yay, go forth and be fruitful, but guess what? This isn't a game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think in that situation, it was really helpful to me, knowing that, especially when I got into art school, it's just like, if you go here, you know that there are other people that couldn't go there. It was like one of those things, because I even remember in my school, like somebody had gotten a scholarship to the art school. And then I found out about it, and that kid was always asleep in the mezzanine on the couches next to the soup vending machine. And I almost got into a fight with him. Like, I almost ripped him off of the couch, and I was just like, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're basically sucking up a spot by not taking this seriously. And that was kind of my thing. So yeah, but I also would say professionally, past that, I didn't have a lot of cheerleaders. And I also think that's another subsection of resistance, when people give false praise. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're the best, but you're kind of not. And, you have people in your ear telling you that you're amazing when you're kind of not. You know what I mean? So, that's a whole other.
It's hard because, nobody, and my parents were encouraging, but nobody knows, who is not a cartoonist, what you need to know in order to do the job, right? If your dad was Joe Kubert or John Romita, okay. They knew what you needed to know in order to do the job. 99.9% of people's parents, even if they support you being an artist, if they are not doing it, are not really going to completely understand it, right? It's just like there's no way they would really completely be able to understand it. And so I understand how it's frustrating if your parents say, don't do that, because I don't know anybody in my life who was successful doing that, right? Which is what most people want to be: musicians or artists or actors. Most parents go, that's not a real, every actor I know worked in a restaurant. Every musician I know was a bum, was starving. But I think you have to have, I was a stubborn person. So even if my parents weren't encouraging, that wasn't going to stop me. I was going to do what I wanted to do, and I wasn't going to let anybody stop me. I'm still that way now. I'm not going to let anybody stop me, right? You have to be the first person in your corner and the last person in your corner, because it's not, it could be a fun job. It can be a cool job. but it is not always an easy job to create from nothing something on demand all the time. Like as soon as we're done with this podcast, I got to work on the strip, right? Do I really feel like working on the strip today? No. I kind of got a little bit of a cold, so I don't really feel like working on the strip. I didn't feel like working on it yesterday when I felt worse than I do today, but I had to sit down and make myself inch along. I mean, that's part of the gig, you know.
A great topic of an episode: working when you don't want to.
Yeah,
I think there's things like that where people are just like they'll just immediately identify with it. Yeah.
I thought about kind of like let's do a reverse of this, like how to get yourself blackballed for comics.
You know, I mean, every job, like a creative job, can be fantastic, but there are days where you don't want to do it, but you have to do it. You know?
Fine, I'll do it.
You know, but I think you have to have the personality that allows you to do it when you don't want to do it. Right? That is the thing that I think most people don't have.
So is that where the rubber hits the road and you have to deflect things when people say like, wow, your job sure must be fun. How fun is that? That must be fun. Look, your office is full of toys. That's so fun. You're a big kid, Mike Manley.
I am a big kid. I am in touch with the things that I loved about the stuff as a kid. But the adult is the one that makes the kid sit in the chair.
Yeah.
The adult goes, you don't like this script, or you don't like this story, or you don't like this job, but you need to pay your income tax. So you better sit your fat ass down and you better work.
Well, the inner voice is
right.
That's
you know, and some people can't do that. They just can't make themselves do something. And if the muse is not in the room, they can't.
Yeah.
They can't do that. So part of it, I mean, for any artist that you know that produces a large volume of work, again, that's another one of those things, another one of those myths. Like if you do what you love, the money will come. No, if you do what you know, there's all these things that people like to say. That doesn't mean you do what you love, the money's gonna. You know, maybe I wanted to sit down and drink beer and play video games every day. I don't see money coming out of that. Right?
Well, if you stream it, maybe. No, but we understand what you're saying.
Beer stream, start with the Mike Manley beer stream.
Steve, we have one question left from Mimi. Would you like to ask it? And then we'll get out of it.
Mimi, given a shout out a couple times in the episode on YouTube. Who are the genius savants in comics right now? Mike Manley.
I don't know. I don't.
Sergio.
I don't know about genius, right? I think that's a term that a lot of people use. That's not always applicable.
Well, Steve threw that out earlier, and that's kind of what she's relating to.
Yeah, I was talking about that art and fear book about how they're like the Mozarts, and like I don't know if there are. I mean, today, I mean, it was meant to be said. I think it was. The idea was it's a once in a century kind of overpowering talent that, you know. You could talk about Mozart, how he wrote his first composition at age 4 or whatever. Like he had a piano at age 4.
Right. There might have been another guy, but he didn't have a piano.
He did yeah, exactly. And his parents were composers. So I mean, it's a thing where even the idea that you might somehow be this mutant with the ability to produce this stuff, you still need an infrastructure and access to technology.
Well, I was gonna say that the biggest issue I see is the environment that existed in the last century that allowed all these fantastic artists and illustrators, the industry that existed, that created that environment, from the great comic strip artists to the great animators to the great painters, illustrators, existed for long enough that those people could sort of develop, right, to become a genius. I will always use somebody like Jack Kirby because his stuff influenced everybody else, right? He was an artist who came along long after he had been successful, but what he did in the 60s at Marvel influenced everybody else, influenced all the other people working at that company. So I don't see any single artist today having a market that is big enough, an environment grand enough to allow them to develop a body of work that could have that effect that you could have with someone like Kirby, because it doesn't exist. I mean, even if you're the top person working at Marvel and DC, your books are going out to a very small number of people compared to what his work went out to. So I don't know. I see a lot of art. I see stuff that I like, but I don't see anybody like Mobius, who was a genius, right? There's a very few people I would use that word with.
JAMAR Nicholas.
JAMAR Nicholas. I would say that for me, someone in the level of Kirby or Mobius does not exist right now. Or maybe they're out there, but they're still developing. And I think that it's mainly because the environment does not exist for people to create on those mass grand scales that used to exist. If you look at Rockwell from the beginning, he had 50-year run to be able to grow, right? It's really hard to look at comics or look at comic strips, any of these formats now, and see that there's someone doing something on such a grand scale that it influences other people to work that way. That's how I think of as a genius.
There are people who've had that kind of impact, but they're Kirby derivative heavily, like Mignola, Bruce Timm. You see progenitors, right? Progenitors, is that the right? You see descendants of that art style. You go, oh wow, there's so much Kirby in this person's work, or so much Bruce Timm in this person's work. But I wonder if LaFleur Olympus, I wonder if some of the stuff on Webtoons, Tilly Walden, I wonder if there's a younger crop of cartoonists whose work is Raina might be influencing. There might be a whole crop of artists right now who are just they cut their teeth on Raina's work, and all they've read is Raina's work, and it's gonna come out. But then you look at Charles Schultz and how few people seem to have been influenced by Charles Schultz compared to others.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing, and I think sometimes people throw the word genius around when they really, really love somebody's work. Like what you're doing is groundbreaking. You're a genius. And there's definitely some people who have a really, really slick, amazing, portfolio of work. But they probably all sit here and bleed out of their foreheads like the rest of us to make that.
All right. So look at somebody like Alex Ross, who is probably at the pinnacle of the direct market, right? He makes a lot of money. He does all these high-end projects. He has gigantic booths at all these big cons.
Dirigibles.
Right. But I don't think he's a genius. I think he's good. I enjoy his work. But genius is somebody that changes the game for everybody else after they do stuff. Right? their work is so powerful that it's like a black hole. It's like a gravity well, and it bends everybody else. I think things are too diverse. And just saying something like webcomics, like there's a lot of webtoons, but there's a lot of people who don't read webtoons. There's a lot of people who read comics who don't read webtoons.
Yeah.
So I would say like somebody like Dave Pilkey, who sells a bajillion friggin' comics.
Yeah.
Is he a genius? Is he influencing other people to draw Pilkey style? Tell Pilkey style stories? I don't know.
Well, I think in his case that he's influencing children to draw, which is kind of, you know, the people we're going to be talking to in a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah,
So maybe.
And I mean, I can also look at people like the Penny Arcade guys and Scott Kurtz. They influenced countless artists. Countless. I mean, that their style was practically the style. If you were going to do an homage to a webcomic, it looked like those guys, right? The cartooning style, the way everything about it. George Cantwood might say the same thing, right?
Yeah, he mentioned it on his interview with us that he kind of came from that school.
But is that genius? That's influence. But I think genius, we have to have a higher standard.
That's above my pay grade.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think there are people that are very influential, like you said, like Frank Miller or Mike Mignola or Bruce Timm. There are certain people that are very influential stylistically, but that doesn't make them a genius.
Yeah, Mimi saying Miyazaki, that might be a good call.
Yeah. He might be the guy living now that, like, Walt Disney in the old days was a genius, right? He was a guy that was able to do something and basically create the field of animation better than anyone else. You know, the Fleischers couldn't do it, you know. But yeah, I think it's harder today also because there's so much stuff. Everything is way fractured, right? There's so many people just read webtoons and just people read this thing over here, and some people just look at this thing and they don't ever look at the other thing. Like we know people in our age range who would never look at a webtoon, right? Never read anything like that, right? And they're not in the least interested in anything.
Philistines.
You know, yeah. So I think it's much harder to be that level of a genius where you warp everybody else to. I mean, there would be no Marvel movies if there was not Jack Kirby.
True. All right, we're getting into the weeds, you guys. Let's get out of here. And you know, this calls for its own kind of, you know, community conversation. So maybe for you YouTubers, go into the community tab on our channel and put your genius things there, and you talk amongst yourselves. Why don't you? I'd love to see more activity in the community tab. Anyway.
And set your clocks ahead 90 minutes so that when this next week's episode starts at 8, you'll have all these questions ready for us at 9:30 your time.
I love it. Yeah, just tweak the algorithm a little bit. So, all right, guys, we're going to put the wheels up. I got to walk the dog. It's been fantastic hanging out with you guys. I have a little preview for next week because thanks to the genius of our boy, see what I did there? The genius of our boy, Steve Conley. Next week, joining us on Pencil to Pencil will be the Comic Lab guys, Brad Geiger and Dave Kellett, fresh off of a fantastic podcast. Will be joining us here. We're going to have like a 5-box. I'm really excited about that. So if you are not a fan of Comic Lab, go subscribe to it on Apple.
Like Hollywood Squares next week.
I know. I think I might be Paul Lynn. I'm very excited. So you know what? Tell your friend this isn't a secret anymore. If you're not subscribed to Pencil and Pencil, what are you doing with your life? Let's get those lights up. Tell them, Michael DeFonte. So, all right, for my colleagues and cohorts, Mike Manley and Steve Conley, What are you touching over there, Steve? What are you doing?
Volume 3 of The Middle Age. It's just I just got my preview copies. It's fantastic. I'm so happy with the job the printer did. You'll be able if you missed the Kickstarter, you'll be able to pick up a copy at Baltimore Comic-Con. And soft covers and stuff like that are already on Amazon. I'm just going to make sure that we had the JNN logo in the bottom of the screen.
That's right. Get that bug in there. It's fantastic. And also in a couple of short weeks, Leon Worst Friends Forever will be in stores October 1st. Pick it up. And then November, my anthology, Abrams Marvel Super Stories. Go pick that up. I drew and wrote a Incredible Hulk story. You got to go cop that. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on. Get involved. Thank you guys so much. We went to our 2-hour time limit. Let's take those wheels up. I would be remiss if we didn't get out of here before I told you to. That's right. Get ready to scrub in and wash those curvy hands. Nice. I love it. All right, get you guys out of here. Time to shine, Steve. We'll see you soon. See you next week.